Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's the 31st. Today I gave myself a 2-day break, but all sorts of interesting things are happening, so I decided to record. So today we're going to talk about the so-called shadow fleet, about the shock that has now gripped everyone involved in this, those transporting unsanctioned oil products, the shadow fleet. What is it? This is a group of vessels that have recently been transporting mainly Russian oil, and before that, for quite a long time, they were transporting Venezuelan and Iranian oil. The scheme is to hide the real owner behind a network of shell companies and convenient flags, and thus bypass the sanctions. So when a vessel like this enters a port, and they don't want anyone to know that it's entering that port, it turns off all kinds of navigation beacons and goes dark, which is why it's called the shadow fleet. Then it comes back and turns them on again. Like, I didn't enter anywhere. Well, that's the price you have to pay for bypassing sanctions. The oil is sold at a significant discount at a lower price. And what about the captain? And so the shipping companies that work with these transports have to include a higher so-called risk premium, meaning the insurance costs go up significantly. Nevertheless, in a world where the daily demand for oil is a little bit about 100 million barrels per day, you can't just kick all the major players out of the market. And well, that's why this shadow fleet has formed and isn't going away now. There are reportedly 1,000 to 1,500 tankers of different sizes worldwide. Naturally, although at the moment there are already a few less of them, 6 fewer. Right now, 3 important processes are happening at the same time. First, the United States of America, your Washington, imposed an embargo against Venezuela and has already confiscated 3 tankers. 2 of them were connected to the shadow fleet, and 1 was operational. I said so, legally, but the current Trump administration wasn't particularly concerned about it. As a result, about 1 million barrels per day of Venezuelan oil will soon drop out of the market. Secondly, Ukrainians have clearly shown that Motoro. I'm from a completely different region of the world, and to launch from there. In recent weeks, they have noticeably intensified their attacks on the Shadow Fleet and recently put it out of action. I think there are 2 such tankers in the Black Sea. But over the weekend, strikes also hit patrol ships in the Caspian Sea, which don't border Ukraine at all. They almost sank a vessel in Rostov-on-Don. These are Russian ports on the Black Sea, and they also disabled another shadow tanker off the coast of Libya in international waters. In this way, Ukraine is clearly demonstrating that you don't need to be a superpower to use drones against civilian tankers. This quickly starts to make everything more expensive, meaning it eats into the profits of everyone involved in this shadow fleet. At the same time, it's unclear whether insurers, which are essentially state entities from Russia and China, will pay out on any claims, whether they will pay at all, because the activities of this fleet are de facto illegal. If you're the captain of a ship, you suddenly realize that there are real actions being taken, and there's a real risk of simply losing your vessel. It seriously dampens the intention and desire to go to certain ports. That's the second point. Here's the third. Another tanker from the Shadow Fleet recently broke down just outside Swedish territorial waters, and that's where the very thing happened that made me tell you all this. The Swedes boarded the ship, took control of it, and discovered, yes, the Swedes boarded, took control, and discovered. That is, Moscow began to treat the Shadow Fleet as a strategic asset, which means it will be handled around the world as a strategic asset. In fact, we are witnessing the beginning and already accelerating destruction of the operational capability of this entire fleet, and most likely all over the world. What will happen if you remove about 1,000 of these ships from the global tanker fleet? There will instantly be a severe shortage of tankers, which will drive up the price of oil for everyone without exception. Honestly, I suspect that these tankers will be used, yes, for transporting non-sanctioned oil, but, so to speak, anything is possible. The countries that are under sanctions, Iran, Venezuela, Russia, will face a serious decline in their export capabilities, which we welcome. Here it's important to consider a couple of things. First, Venezuela. The main volume of its production is so-called heavy, high-sulfur oil. It's difficult to extract, process, and transport. Any serious disruption of flows means that restoring export volumes will take months, if not years. And if the United States is standing around with its fleet, then until the United States leaves, that's the first problem for them. Second, Russia and Ukraine are attacking not only the shadow fleet, they're hitting the entire energy infrastructure, pipelines, pumping stations, and plants that process oil. If Russia can't export oil in order not to ruin its own pipelines, it will have to stop production in Siberia. Moskva has a small reserve, about 1 to 1.5 million barrels per day, but after that, they'll have to start shutting down production in the north. If you mothball a field in northern Siberia, the layers will freeze through in winter, and you'll have to drill everything again, which takes years. The last time something like this happened was at the collapse of the Soviet era, and back then it took almost 2 decades to recover. So, we're not just talking about a one-time price shock in the oil market in the near future. We're talking about a multi-stage crisis that simultaneously hits both transportation and production in at least 2 countries. Against this background, Iran looks almost like a footnote in small print. Another point is that Russia treats the Black Sea Fleet as a strategic asset, which automatically makes it a military tool. Germany and Denmark are already directly accusing Moscow of using these ships as platforms for launching drones that fly over critical infrastructure, including airports in Europe, as they pass through the Baltic Sea. If you remember, even before Thanksgiving, there were repeated reports in Europe about drones that forced airspace to be closed. All of these are Russian devices, and they were launched specifically from the Baltic Fleet. As a result, Europe and Europeans find themselves in the following situation, both from a military and an economic point of view. They come to the conclusion that this fleet needs to be stopped. Ukraine and America are already either confiscating or destroying these ships, and the Europeans will probably develop their own methods of influence, more suitable for their toolkit. For example, boarding them and towing them somewhere. So, in the near future, we should expect a lot of operations to intercept and detain such ships, possibly in European waters, which Ukrainians hope is the Achilles heel of the Russian regime. And it's not just about destroying oil infrastructure, but about completely paralyzing or making Russian oil exports incredibly unprofitable. In general, gentlemen, we're living in very interesting times. And as more of these stories end with explosions and shootouts, I'll keep you informed about them until we meet again.